Alright, response video to this, what is his name again? Yeah, I lost it. Glenn? Something like that. Anyway, yeah, put this camera somewhere. Yeah, whatever, I won't play this video. Because the argument is pretty much made out of the same old routine. You know, I say that these pleasures are worth this much pain. And I polled some people who are, you know, basically, you know, the breeders of breeders of breeders of breeders, the long lineage of them, and they all say, yeah, life is good, life is good. So trust me, life is worth it because they say so. You know, the pain is worth the gain. I could go into any cult, I could go into any bunch of people that do some wacky thing, and they're going to say, yeah, it was worth it, yeah, it was worth it, yeah, it was worth it. Mountain climbers, they all say it. Oh, you know, heroin addicts, you know. So you can't really call that an objective standard. So I'll go back to my example of cigarettes, right? I'm addicted to nicotine. The only thing that makes these things tolerable is the fact that I'm addicted. If I wasn't addicted to nicotine, this cigarette would taste like shit. It would be a crappy experience. But because I'm addicted, it satisfies my need. So if I feel disoriented and tense and I have a cigarette, it makes me feel good. Now, I smoke the e-cigarette, so this is, you know, these assholes always have to explain. This is the only cigarette I've had, 2 days. So, you know, don't get all hysterical. But it's going to be really good. Because my body wants it. It aches for it. It's addicted. And that's everything. That's our entire psychology is built on that premise. So I would argue to you that if you did real surveys, you know, where you put real things on the table, and you said, well, here's 100 orgasms, and here's brain surgery. People are going to say, yeah, okay, forget it. No, I don't want that deal. You gotta sweeten the pot somehow. You can make it 1,000 orgasms. And they'd probably still say, yeah, fuck it. I mean, you know, so unless you're taking away something they need, any extra they're not going to buy, okay, with that thing called suffering. So that's sort of the giveaway, is that if it was an extra, if it was a dessert, we wouldn't pay the big price for it. If it's the basic meal to get me from here to tomorrow, my fair allotment, then I'd say then everybody seems okay with the deal. So it's a whole different value equation, depending on whether the person thinks it's gravy or they think it's the basic substance of existing. So what's another way to put this? But yeah, if we could actually do the experiment and force people to actually, you know, if we could actually monetize this thing you're calling pleasure, I'm going to argue you're not going to pay for it. You suggested you would give up your computer and presumably all that goes with the internet and everything just to put antelopes on Mars. I think if I really gave it to you and forced you to sacrifice something, I don't think you would. Okay, you can say you would, but I don't think you would, because you'd say, what the fuck are they going to do there? Oh, that's right, live and then die. And again, this idea that you call it pleasure as if it is something made of nothing, as if it just falls on us out of nowhere, I think is a completely backward notion. Pleasure is made out of the deprivation. We can see it with hunger. If you're not hungry, food is not pleasant. It would be very unpleasant to be fed when you're not hungry. So, you know, the whole idea of pleasure is very dependent on desire, on you being horny for it. And if you're not horny for it, there's not going to be any pleasure. You have to desire. And what is desire made out of is essentially creating a tension, an unsettledness, an uncalmness, a kind of a discomfort that motivates you to get the comfort, to get the gratification, the completeness. And again, if you're not in the desire state itself, I don't think you'd say, yes, give me the desire just so I can have the comfort. So give me the cigarette addiction just so I can have the pleasure of smoking a cigarette. Now, you wouldn't do that if there was a real liability to the addiction. If there was a real chance that you weren't going to get the addiction satisfied, or that you would be addicted for the rest of your life and have to pay a huge amount of money for your cigarettes, or but if it's just a one-time event and just for 10 minutes you're going to be addicted to cigarettes and enjoy cigarettes, well, then you'd probably say, fine, go ahead. But if there was some real downside risk, you wouldn't mess with it. And that's what life carries, a real downside risk. Getting eaten alive is not a little thing, it's a big thing. And if I put it on the table and you had the chance to buy your way out of it, alright, let's just say your fate was to get eaten by a crocodile, and it was going to take 3 minutes for you to die. It wouldn't take that long, but let's just say 3 minutes. If they can pretend that it took OJ 15 minutes to kill that Goldman guy, then we could pretend it takes 3 minutes for a crocodile to kill you. Let's say you struggle well, and he only has your leg, and he gets you slowly but surely. He finishes you off. Rips your leg off, let's say, first, and then finishes you off afterward. Now if you could buy your way out of that by just giving up some pieces of your life, like your laptop, I think you would. I think that you'd bargain for. You'd bargain to get out of that suffering. And you'd bargain, if you had to, I could probably extort a price pretty high before you'd say, alright, I'll eat that. I personally would give up the whole thing for a bag of potato chips. Yeah, one more good bag of potato chips and you can just erase my whole existence. It just doesn't mean anything. I just don't see how you can put such value on this silly chase of empty gratification. And so even things like orgasm, which you mentioned, and that's the pinnacle of the pleasure pyramid, let's say. What does it represent, really? It represents basically a kind of brain death, where you're just released of all recognition of your existence in a way. You'd have no, for the briefest of moments, you are expelled from, all connection. But in some ways, it's like the other reboot experiences, like a sneeze, for example. A sneeze basically reboots you. You sneeze and it's just this great feeling because it's like it just cleansed you. And you start all over again. So it's like a really, really, really short orgasm. What else? What other pleasures are there? But we don't have that many. Realistically. And all the ego pleasures are really synthetic because they're just perceptual in the sense that, I imagine. It's like you could go through your whole life miserable. Like for example, thinking something like you had a small penis, because let's say you had a 10-inch penis, but the only other person you knew had a 12-inch penis. And so your whole life thinking, oh man, I have a small penis. Oh, that was pretty cool. Yeah, that'll be really good in the video. See, the camera couldn't believe it. It was just shocked. And then you find out that, hey, wait a minute, everybody else has this little tiny penis, and so I'm twice as big as them, so yeah, I'm all happy. And it's just a matter of changing your belief. You change one simple perception, and all of a sudden the world is good, and before the world sucked. And so it's this perceptual thing. And so what was the misery before? The misery was thinking you were less, you weren't great, you weren't alpha, you weren't good enough. And now the gratification is thinking you're better, you're superior, you're blah blah blah. You can't get kind of more superficial than this. That's just the definition of just soap opera drama bullshit. It has nothing to do with anything real. And once you know that that's the game, then just make up your own lies to live by, to make yourself feel good about yourself, but that's all they're going to be. Just to get this ego thing the hell out of the way. So again, but it's again the idea of you derive the pleasure by eliminating something negative. It really, I think you can't describe a pleasure where I can't explain how all you're feeling through that pleasure is getting released from a burden. The liability of, something good happens because somebody dies and you're relieved of the grief, or the orgasm thing, which is basically relieving all your bodily tensions, all thoughts of other crap are kind of out of your head. You're not thinking about, the IRS is after you or some other kind of crap in that moment. It's just a perfect escapism, and it's through that escaping your mortality and your reality that you experience this bliss. And again, it's such a momentary thing. It's so short-lived. It would amaze me that's the price people will pay for this moment on top of the mountain. And again, so that's sort of what we're arguing is that yeah, some idiots think it's worth it to maybe have their feet freeze off to go climb a mountain so they can barely breathe and almost pass out on top of a mountain. And rationally, you can say that's just retarded. Alright, the experience can't be that good, and we can synthesize it. You really want to know what it's like on Mount Everest? Well, go find a warehouse somewhere, a food warehouse, and they'll probably have nice big walk-in refrigerators, and you go sit in one of those for a while, and you'll know what it's like on top of Mount Everest. You put some little pretty pictures in front of you, and you won't know the difference. I mean, it's just, I'm sorry, it's just bullshit. So anyway, I guess what I'm saying is I don't think it's proper to compare suffering, the experience of physically hostile sensation, with pleasure, as if they're the opposites and as if they pay for each other. Because it is desire that's the real game. Desire is what we pay. Suffering is the price of desire. It isn't the price of pleasure. And if I really put all the pleasures in a pile, and I put all your sufferings, your miseries, your blights on a pile, I think you'd realize that the blight pile is much higher. You spent more time of your life in that stressed condition than in that bliss condition, and that most of your life was in this mediocrity between the two, where a kind of purgatory, where you're just mushing through life. Slight headache, slight, got a little sore knee, you're just kind of limping through. And then you have these times where, you're physically strong, and these times when you're really, 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 really weak. And I wouldn't, personally, see any sense or logic in paying such a high price for this, perception of grandeur, of being, like I said, most of it's just an escapism. What's going on? I mean, when you're eating or even watching a movie, the pleasure we derive from that. What is that doing for us? Well, we're vicariously living. We're separated from our real life stress, and we're having an adventure usually in a harmless condition where we're not really getting chewed up or sawed in half or something else, and we can vicariously play all kinds of roles in our head, pretending we're the hero or the villain or the victim, but not having to physically endure anything real in terms of a burden. So of course we would find that enjoyable. But is that enjoyment something you would pay the hard currency of hard suffering for? And I would argue that if I could really monetize this, put it into real bills that people had to exchange, that they wouldn't pay for it. I mean, as good as this is, it's not worth the 40 years, the ruined health, well, the risked health, let's say. No evidence of it ruined yet. And just the expense of it, the mess of it, the offensiveness of it to others. Totally unnecessary. And the pleasure is totally derived through addiction. Nothing else. There's nothing else that compels me to do this but addiction. And it's a negative circumstance. It's a need imposed on me, just like all the rest of our gratifications are essentially built out of. We're addicted to not failing. You want to call that success? Okay. Food we're obviously addicted to. So yeah, I just don't think you're doing fairness to the equation if you give pleasure too much credit. I think you're giving it way too much credit, and I don't think there's any way at all you could ever use it in a utilitarian kind of way to attempt to mix pleasure and pain in terms of a social context, because quite obviously they're not equal to the same thing. I don't want to pay the burden or the risk of somebody else's pleasure. If they like to fly in airplanes, let's say, I don't want to incur the risk of their plane falling on me. I don't want the downside risk for their silly, frivolous, idiotic pleasure. When they should be able to derive satisfaction without doing that. Just like the mountain climbers, I don't want to pay to go peel their body out of the ice and bury them properly or any of the other crap. The liability should all be theirs, not mine. That's where the utilitarian thing sort of breaks down, is you can't use somebody else's pain as payment for your satisfaction. So as soon as you impose it on anything other than yourself, in my opinion, you've committed a trespass that's more ethically and value real, that's worth more than any amount of pleasure you could put on the other side of the scale. Because an imposed suffering is it's just that. It's imposed. You just can't do that. You can't presume the same value equation exists in their head, where they're just saying something mushy like you, where, well, on balance, the grazing animal's life is worth it, even if it gets eaten by a lion. It's not a life I'd live, so it's only worth it to a mind who thinks so. And I'd argue that syndrome, it could be just like with religion or other things, could be described as a functional mental brokenness or illness even. The life delusion. I wish people just leave me the fuck alone. Anyway, so till next time and such. And so forth and whatnot. Almost out of time anyway, I think.